If in the 1980s you wanted to go hang out with a group of your friends, you'd call them from your landline in the kitchen and hope that you had some form of privacy, and probably a long enough cord to walk around, especially if you were out engaging in shenanigans. After securing your meetup, you'd hop on your bike and come home before the streetlights turned on. The days of the simplicity of not having constant access to the entire world are long over, and I'm sure most people have heard of iPad kids, where millennial or Gen Z parents shove a flashing LED screen in front of their kids' faces to shut them up. The state of information technology in our world has been oversaturated with buzzwords and artificial intelligence. We find ourselves engaging more in online communities with almost total strangers who we get to know and call friends, despite the physical separation being hundreds or sometimes tens of thousands of miles away. So this begs the question: humans being very social animals that rely on nonverbal communication and other physical social cues, how does the lack of these senses shape the way we interact with others online, and what does this mean for our mental health? How can we be digitally literate and be appropriate advocates against misinformation? It might be pretty weird to refer to a year as recent as 2016 in the historical context, but 2016 was a pretty important year, not because of all the poorly aged memes that somehow have a modern-day precedent with Elon Musk.
That was something. I am become meme. Yeah, pretty much. I'm living the meme. It's like there's living the dream and there's living the meme, and it's pretty much what's happening, you know.
That's a gripe for another time. I know we were all subjected to the constant headlines of fake news that was disseminated by President Trump at the time. While I wouldn't want to touch politics with a 10-foot pole, I think it is important to highlight the cultural shift as it relates to our understanding and awareness of misinformation. Instances of misinformation usually only cause minor disturbances in our lives, and we may brush it off. We might even accept it as a fact of life, but technology has been manipulated and utilized to achieve nefarious goals. In The Death of Truth by Stephen Brill, Brill refers to a documentary called The Social Dilemma, where Tristan Harris, a co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology, recalls a Stanford course called the Persuasive Technology Lab, which he says, and quote, taught him how you could use everything we know about the psychology of what persuades people and building that directly into technology. I'm sure there's a time in the not-so-distant past that you can also identify instances of misinformation, probably like crazy Uncle Mike coming over to Thanksgiving dinner, talking about how 5G is making people autistic and that chemtrails are keeping us all sick. It's imperative as modern citizens to actively combat and identify misinformation to curb these dangerous instances of sometimes state-sponsored propaganda, or people with motives to manipulate the facts and public opinion. Although it appears that the proliferation of misinformation in our society has reached catastrophic levels, we can reverse it. Brill goes on to state, if we have learned anything, it is that we cannot count on politicians and tech companies or the system that sustains misinformation to bring us back to a society of truth. Meta and X and other tech firms do have the power and the ability to squash and prohibit misinformation. The Federal Trade Commission and other regulatory bodies should act to protect the integrity of tech consumers. There are many changes that Brill outlines in his book, such as toughening enforcement on the disclosure of online advertisements and news sites that finance political operations. AI has also been an exponentially growing sickness in the online space. There's innumerable instances in which companies like Google and Microsoft have blatantly stolen copyrighted material and personal artworks from several artists to train their models off of. As an artist and as a writer that exists in this particular niche online internet space, it is disheartening at the lack of care that has been expressed in this particular field of regulation. These technological advancements are relatively new to society and have yet to appropriately mature culturally and societally. It takes time to regulate and form policies for these developing issues. However, we do need to start holding these companies accountable to protect our freedom of speech, our art, our personal data, our photos, and most importantly, our identities. Another issue regarding the internet and its reliance in our society has led to an unintended health crisis. On top of companies selling user data and capitalizing on social instability, people are finding their identities in online communities and investing emotional capital into those communities. There are a litany of negative mental health impacts associated with this, not because our traditional viewpoints of cyberbullying and violence in video games is necessarily pinpoint accurate, but because the existence in the online space has uprooted and thrown all social cues and nuances out the window, and people, such as myself, do struggle to appropriately engage when there's no tonal cues or body language to base our feelings off of. For instance, I thought my grandpa, who communicates exclusively in all capital letters, was always yelling at me, until I just realized he's old as hell. For a while, I was assisting in a project as a voice actor in a Discord server. I felt quite often that I was being left out, despite nothing truly suggesting that. It really wasn't until I began researching for this project that I'm not only not alone in feeling this way, but why I felt this way. How is it that for thousands of years, humans have fought, killed, maimed, invented the automobile, hunted, gathered, and created SpongeBob, all for some 23-year-old to get his feelings hurt over a lack of communication? The two primary forces that influence online language use are the paucity of social cues, media leanness, and the potential asynchronicity of a medium. I know that's a mouthful, but essentially that just means that the lack of social cues and the possible timing of certain events, online and offline, influence online communications. This is from BAME, her book called Personal Connections in the Digital Age. These factors can often decrease the value of online communication and subsequently relationships. There's truly an enormous learning curve on all fronts as it relates to our existence online. From regulatory bodies that must focus on protecting user data and the manipulation of media to purposely sow dissent amongst the citizens of the world, to mental health, the proliferation of AI, and learning how online social cohesion helps or discourages these factors. In the grand scheme of things, the internet is young, and humans, albeit intelligent creatures, learn pretty slowly, and change in the world is often written in blood, strife, discourse, and dissent. The internet has directly brought about the rise of tech empires who do not hold the best interests of the people in mind, and it is imperative to practice digital literacy and learn to overcome these unintended side effects of possibly one of the greatest inventions in human history.
She makes men into boys, she makes giants into men. She'll have you feeling guilty before you can count to 10. Oh, sharp mind.